Okay, I think we'll get started. How's the sound? Decent? So thanks for joining. We are here to have the digital assets and the climate economy from digital MRV to tokenization panel. I'm excited to moderate. I'm pinch hitting as the moderator was unable to travel at the last minute, so can't wait to jump in on this topic. It's such a fun, interesting, fresh set of content that we don't usually get to dig into. But welcome. So we've got with us three kind of carbon veterans in the space, and Mike Green is first on my left here, Carbon Capital Advisors, Neil Cohn, the Global Head of Markets and Sustainability at the Chia Network, and Corinne Boone, who's the Group Head of Americas for AirCarbon Exchange. So I think we're just going to start out with them presenting a little bit of their bio and organization and what they're doing in the space. You know, as I've dug into it, every use case is different. When you look at blockchain and tokenization and all the different applications in MRV, every sort of project and application and way it's being deployed looks a little bit different. So I think it'd be great to just hear from each of them on why they're in the space, what they're doing, and a little bit about their background. So let's start with you, Mike.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming in. I know it's an afternoon session, and you're probably just had a nice a break, so hopefully you grab some coffee, but we'll try and keep you as engaged as possible. I have a little bit of a unique background in coming to this space in that I'm not at all from like a crypto or digital background. I got my start in my hometown. I'm from a small mountain town, and we saw the economic challenges of when it doesn't snow and what that does to our local economy. So from a very young age, dealing with the climate crisis was something that I got to deal with and saw around my own community. So when I originally went out to found an organization called Climate Exchange in 2013, the idea was that we were going to assist and support with more ambitious climate policy and engaging the private sector in Massachusetts. One of the very quick rising topics that came from those businesses was wanting to see an expansion of RGGI to cover other sectors of the economy and possible potential introduction of a carbon tax statewide. Now, that work continued and expanded outside of Massachusetts. Most people, maybe this crowd, would be more familiar with it than others, but we've actually seen 58 pieces of legislation introduced in 27 states across the U.S. since 2015, introducing a carbon market or a carbon tax policy. Climate Exchange did a lot of the economic analysis and some of the legislative and writing behind that. And one of the things that almost in every community, in every space where I would go and be working and kind of be the person representing the private sector talking about this market-based approach predominantly to an environmental advocacy audience was this question around offsets. The validity of them, the challenges of whether or not it creates sacrifice zones within the community that has that point source pollution in their backyard. And it got me into kind of thinking and questioning, well, how could we create a new set of offsets that met some of those challenges, met some of those demands, and also served some of the highest need communities? So that's where I'm at now with a firm called Carbon Capital Advisors. We're linking a group of family offices, investors, to on-the-ground projects that are in some of the hardest-to-reach communities globally. So we're trying and pushing for methodologies in places where even in the country itself, we haven't seen an offset project actually have any sort of gain any sort of traction. So I'll have a little bit more time to talk about those projects and what they look like. But that's a little bit about me and my background, what brings me to the space.
Thanks, Mike. All right, Neil, if you're ready to give a little bit about your background and why you're in the space and what your current organization is doing in technology.
Sure. Hi, guys. I'm not a newbie to the carbon space. I think my first connection was checking out COP3 in 1997 in Kyoto. In that time, it was pretty exciting as we were trading moonbeams. Nobody knew what we were actually doing. We had to define them as we went along and make up acronyms that we thought made sense. Can you hear me back there? Okay. Can you hear me now? All right. So, gosh, I've been in this for too long. A lot of you guys know me. Carbon 1.0 was, as I was saying, it was really like we didn't know what we were doing. We knew that carbon trading was coming, and we wanted to jumpstart it because there was a risk to companies to, how could we take, and I came out of traditional markets. I was a commodities trader, And I was really excited about finding a way to use markets to solve global issues, to solve the issue of, in those days we called it global warming. It was before we even used climate change. At that point, nobody, the public didn't really understand what climate change or global warming was, and that was the biggest issue. But we figured it out. We got carbon going. Kyoto actually was ratified. It was a pretty exciting time. With the recession and with failures in legislation, we kind of went through this the climate winter, we can call it, and we had a different kind of trading. I think right now it's really exciting. We're entering what I'll call carbon finance or climate finance 3.0. And what's exciting is it's early days. It was tiny, but we were really competitive, right, Corinne? We were like two companies in the market killing each other, and it was silly. But I think right now we know this is a crisis, and we have to collaborate. We have to move forward. We have to find ways that make sense. The Paris Agreement, unlike the Kyoto Protocol, which was a centralized top-down system, Paris Agreement is bottom-up. Countries all have their own designated contribution, and therefore they wanted their autonomy in how they move forward. As I looked at the Paris Agreement, as I looked at the issue of what we did in Carbon 1.0, which are these giant projects, because they were the only ones you could afford to validate and put through the process, this was a chance to kind of come in and use these new technologies, use AI, use the ability to find blockchain that made sense, and to really scale the markets to achieve what we wanted to do before, but we didn't really have the ability to go far enough. We did something that was good, but it wasn't enough. So I took it upon myself to really find the technologies that worked, and I think I spent 3 years going through consensus, looking at Ethereum, looking at every different flavor of it, and I was really frustrated because there was always some secret that nobody wanted to tell you, and they would give you all these crazy convoluted explanations. They were really complex, and I was like, but I don't get it. and the truth is that usually there was a flaw. It was the energy use. It was this incredible centralization. It was the inability to really use and hold any data. It was like they weren't there yet. But most of these blockchains were created originally as pilots. They were never gone. Nobody went back to recreate them, and I almost gave up. And I was literally in Japan, and I met somebody who had worked on a project. It was a Chia project, and it was a bunch of guys that were involved when Bitcoin was created and were disappointed with where it went, with the energy use, loved the elegance of decentralized markets and what they could bring to the world, the ability to democratize access to capital markets and to really get truly scalable and more equitable markets. And it was incredible that I found this group, and it was led by Cohn, the guy who created BitTorrent. So I started to just spend as much time as I could looking into it, and the more I saw, the better it was. Instead of doing the what Bitcoin does, right? We have like hundreds of power plants operating full speed to power a light bulb, to have one hash that gets accepted to create the next block. That's how you validate a chain. And Bram's idea is like, well, we do need a resource to vote. We do need the ability. Originally, it was supposed to be one CPU, one vote to figure out, to validate that chain. What was the resource we could use so everybody couldn't have unlimited votes? He decided it was disk drive space. It was excess drive capacity in everybody's computers. And if we took all the hashes that were made at one time and just stored them on hard drives, you would stop processing. You would not use energy anymore. It sits on hard drives on a computer. But with that node, so therefore that is constantly being updated, and we have 250,000 nodes active. And if you look at the next closest...
Neil, I'm loving all these details, but I do want to get to Corinne and have her do her bio and intro.
I'll talk later.
But there you have it. You can dive in deep in this topic, like so fast, right? So that's the whole point.
I don't know how to follow that.
We were like...
Yeah.
The funny thing is we did this all the time. So it's
I do believe that, yeah. But let's turn to Corinne here about carbon exchange and what you're up to.
All in good jest. So I guess I have a different background than both of, probably all three of you. I had the pleasure, I guess, I studied environmental economics in university in the 1980s before it was in vogue, long before it was in vogue, and learned about, you could actually put a price on pollution, and you could integrate it into and look at for balances between environment, economy, and society. And I was just hooked. Like, that was it for me. I was like, okay, this is my future. And so at the time when the Brundtland Commission was out, I'm sure most of you don't remember that, but if you don't, it's sort of a seminal document that really sort of laid a lot of the framework for the sustainability movement. So I then, quite by accident, I went to work for an electric power utility. I thought I'm just going to sort of learn the ropes and figure it all out and work in the environmental space. And lo and behold, we got an announcement that we were getting a new chairman. And it was 1992, it was the end of the year, and that new chairman was Maurice Strong. And again, I'm not sure how many of you are old enough to remember that, but Maurice Strong was the chair of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change before it was that, in Rio in 1992. So he was the chair of the first summit that then led to the UN FCCC being created eventually. So he left that summit, obviously very, very passionate about climate, fellow Canadian, very much pride in that. Came to Ontario and said, is there an environmental economist in this company that's interested in environment and sustainability? And it was like, yeah, that's me. And so since 1992, I've been involved in climate change. Very lucky. I feel very privileged to have had all the opportunities that I've had. We were doing carbon deals in Ontario and Canada in the 1990s, along with NOx and SO2. We bought a tract of land in 1993 in Costa Rica in order to, for conservation purposes, shut down Parliament in the province. So this is the first big carbon deal when people were like, oh my God, not in my backyard. So just, I guess, long story short, I got into, did a lot of work in emissions trading in the 1990s, long before it was all voluntary. A number of you in the room will remember a lot of that. Canada laid the groundwork, very proud to say Canada in itself laid a lot of the groundwork for many of the protocols and registries that do exist today. Was recruited into Cantor Fitzgerald to co-found a carbon brokerage business. Also very, very lucky in that regard. And I was actually at Kyoto and very much involved in a lot of the discussions around the protocol, and was so very hyped about the protocol and its potential for the future. Did lots of deals that I would say it wasn't that we didn't know what we were doing. It's that there wasn't a lot of momentum other than those that really believed in it. The financial sector wasn't that much involved, although at the time working for Cantor, they were very committed. But there wasn't the same kind of momentum that we have now from the private sector, from the institutional investment sector, from net zero pledges. But went from Cantor into engineering when the carbon markets died. Took a lot of CDM projects with me. Thought my career in carbon was finished. To be honest, I thought, okay, been there, done that, not sure if I have the energy. And then I got a call from the co-founder of AirCarbon. They said, would you like to talk to us about AirCarbon exchange? And I'm like, yeah, I'm willing to listen. And then we talked about, the ability for exchanges to really open up transparency and efficiency and lower costs and provide access and all the things we'll talk about today. And again, I was like, here I am in my mid-50s, and I'm hooked again. And so here we are today, and I'm really proud to have had the opportunities all through my career, and I'm really proud of what all of you are doing in this room, especially the young people, because you're the future and you're going to make this a reality. So thanks.
Great. Yeah, well, we couldn't have three better panelists because they've all had their journey through the space in all these different ways, and now here they are working on the technology. So the things I'm curious about that I want to touch on are, what problems is technology trying to solve? As we all know, with a lot of carbon offset projects, it's not as simple as just throwing a blockchain at it or something. There's a lot of boots on ground that still has to happen in terms of verification and auditing and all of that. So how do you integrate those things? Transparency, another excellent, aspect of this to talk about. But I also want to get to sort of regulatory oversight. We know that could be coming towards carbon and towards crypto and blockchain and all of that too. So is the space prepared for that? And then I think user authentication is another interesting piece that we're seeing evolution in, right? So we'll try to hit on all those. But let's just start with what problems do you three think it's trying to solve? Maybe from the MRV side or from the accounting side. There's so many different ways technology can help and play a role. What are you seeing? What do you think is exciting? What are you working on?
I can't hear you at all.
Oh.
Okay. I have to hear you.
All good. Can I help?
Anyway, if anybody asks a question of me, please speak loudly. I have a bit of a hearing disability. I can't hear tones, so it causes some challenges. I think this whole area of blockchain, I got to say, you think about carbon exchanges and, tokenization, and then you automatically end up on the discussion about crypto, and then there's all kinds of bad things about crypto that we hear about. There's all kinds of good things about it as well, but what we do at AirCarbon, and I think what a lot of our competitors are looking at, and many really, what we want to do is use the elements of these digital technologies and opportunities for good. So, I think there was a movement out there called blockchain for good at one point in time, but really what we see, the challenges that this helps us is to overcome is, one, increase liquidity. I mean, I don't know how many of you are brokers or traders in the room, but it's very painful getting through an offset transaction. Even if you have your credits issued, it can be very painful. It take a lot of time. There's a lot of work with lawyers, a lot of negotiations back and forth. The liquidity, the ability to actually trade in seconds, once you've gone through the KYC process and been onboarded onto an exchange, like, it's incredible. You can go in and say, I want 100,000 tons of a nature-based project in Costa Rica or wherever you would like to have it. And if it's on the exchange and if it's listed and if they've gone through the KYC process, it'll come up. You won't know actually who it is until you actually go through the whole process. But you can actually, the timing involved in that, you can actually enter into a transaction in seconds. And then, by the time it clears through the trustee structure that we have and all of the financial requirements around delivery and purchase and payment, it might take 5 to 8 days. That's, for many of these transactions, especially the larger ones that Neil mentioned before, that's cutting sometimes 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months off your transaction. It's also a lot cheaper. It's much more transparent. We use the blockchain. The blockchain provides an irrefutable record of each and every transaction. It's all serialized. The tokenization follows all, and the tokenization is really just a digital representation of a blockchain, which is asset-backed by a ton of carbon. If you're talking about accounting challenges and accounting issues, and as we get to all of these issues around reporting, all of that is really much taken, very much taken care of by the use of by using these types of technologies, the blockchain, the tokenization, the clearing, the settlement. If you on the AirCarbon exchange, if you decide you want to retire a credit, you want to use it for a voluntary commitment or you want to use it for some other aspect, the token actually gets burned, so it goes away. You can't.
What does that mean for folks who might not be familiar with burning? If we're used to the issuance,
it just gets
retirement
destroyed.
life cycle,
It gets destroyed.
Like inside the ledger, there's a process by which.
Yeah, it's not usable. It ends. The blockchain ends. You can still see on the blockchain what happened, into infinity, but the blockchain ends. There is no further transaction. It's lists retired. We can retire it for you. You can retire it yourself. We have links to all the registries and makes it all very seamless. So these are all things that, throughout my career have been huge challenges. How do we actually increase liquidity, enhance transparency? I cannot tell you how many clients I've had that have walked away from transactions because of the costs involved in it. Project developers, bless their hearts, that are looking to help people develop carbon credit projects and take them through the market, often say, well, we'll help you do this, but here's the transaction fee I'm going to charge you. But wait, there's all these other fees over here. And, by the use of, this type of technology and the services of AirCarbon, CBL, Xpansiv, whoever, we're cutting a lot of those costs out. You still have those costs, but, when you get to the sale, it's much easier. And because we have all the relationships with the registries, with AirCarbon at least, you can either have an account with the registry or not have an account with the registry. And AirCarbon has the ability to transact through its registries with its trustees systems, which are all very much separated in order to make sure that you get what you need and not have to go through the hassle of figuring out how to do everything yourself. And that really does help in the cost and if we're going to get to the biggest commodity market in the world, which is what we've been talking about for 20 years, and I got to give a shout out to my former boss at Cantor, who said in the year 2000, this is going to be the biggest commodity market in the world, long before people have been saying it today, then we have to get some liquidity and transparency. And his name was Carlton Bartels, by the way, one of the founders of these carbon markets.
Well, thank you for that explanation. I think for a lot of us still digging in and understanding, what's really happening inside some of these newer type of platforms. Neil or Mike, who wants to jump in next on what opportunities do you see, what problems are you solving?
Sorry. Back to the mic. Yeah, and I really appreciate what Corinne said, and there are exchanges, CBL, Xpansiv. There's AirCarbon. What Chia has done is we're really base layer. So we're more of a competitor to an Ethereum. We have redesigned how blockchain operates to basically take what was really effective in Bitcoin. We're the first consensus mechanism that is what's called a Nakamoto consensus since Bitcoin. It actually is very efficient and secure. But we're not creating exchanges. We're hoping that exchanges could be enabled through our system, but there's also what's called decentralized trading. So you can take a token and I could text an offer to somebody and they can accept it, and it goes through on the blockchain. And it's immediate settlement, not 5 days, not anything, it's immediate. So we're working really hard to be in sync with the stewards of the environment and the climate. So we've gone out to the World Bank and we're helping enable them to keep records. We've enabled a systematic approach to securing data so that the Paris Agreement, all of these countries can have their own registries, but they all get reflected into this climate warehouse data layer where we can look and see if there's double issuance. We could do comparisons. We can filter and understand the differences between all of the different projects and the credits that are available. But we're not getting involved in creating these exchanges and products. We think the market can do that itself. We're just trying to enable it and facilitate it and work hand in hand. We don't want to disintermediate the authorities, the exchanges especially, even the registries especially. I mean, especially once we went beyond the Kyoto era and the UNFCCC wasn't the arbiter of what is environmentally correct. It really, the gatekeepers, the ones that kept this market viable, because without environmental integrity, we have nothing. What kept that going is CAR, is ACR, is Vera, is Gold Standard, and that has enabled us to go forward. So when people come in and say, blockchain's great, we're going to disintermediate everything, decentralization, that's a problem. If you want to really create change, you need to work with the stewards, with the actual industry, and do it in a way that is in sync with them. I mean, I come from this world. I came back to it not because Chia needed to do climate. Chia is doing trade finance. We're doing all sorts of currencies around the world. This is my passion, and this is in the ethos of what we're doing. And I'm hoping that we could bring the reality to it so that the type of scams that we've seen so prevalent in blockchain and all of the risks that we face if we go down those paths don't happen. Because right now we're facing such a crisis that any loss in confidence in what we're doing is catastrophic. So I'm here because I'm trying to defend the integrity of that and work with those that do that.
That is great to hear, Neil. And how about you, Mike? You're kind of on the front end as a funder, so maybe you can share with us a real-world example. Like how are you deploying tech out in real projects?
Yeah, so can definitely talk about the projects. Also want to talk a little bit about the government side of it that we're working with, because some of the governments that we're working with, and you read through the NDC of the country, and it'll have maybe 1, 2, 3 sentences if you're lucky on how they envision using carbon markets. And that's a massive gulf now that we have some level of familiarity and direction on 6.2 and 6.4 and a potential to use finance flows under Article 5. And we can go into that if folks want to ask questions later about it. But the matter of the fact is that we have some points of direction to move forward with, yet governments are still very, very far behind where many of the folks in this room in the voluntary space are currently with our thinking, our ability to adopt technology and embrace it and move it forward as an opportunity for climate finance. One of the countries that we're working very closely with is in Nigeria. The problem that we initially set out to solve investing in this project and being supportive was that what if we could actually tie a sensor tech to cook stoves that would provide real live data collection and understanding of how the stove's being used. Now, we ran into some major problems. Most of those problems that were on the delivery and logistics and supply side, we knew we were going to run into. But the challenges that we are seeing still very prevalent are actually more in our community, more in the buyer side, and more in the methodology sides that are currently in existence. In Nigeria, and in particular project that we have that's in Kogi State, One of the things that we found, first off, when you do your lab test, you do your baseline analysis before you put your cook stoves out into the field. You essentially have created a finite lab version of what happens. But as soon as you take that cook stove and you put it into a household, guess what the sensors tell us? That it's just about anything but what we necessarily thought that baseline analysis and what that 6-year, 5-year, or 10-year project of that stove was going to look like. Now, the challenge that we're running into is how do people want to buy, at what quantities, at what size, at what time duration. And as soon as you start to realize that we're going above and beyond what many of the methodologies would require us to do with an added cost, as well as a new level of transparency, we thought in the very beginning, this is great. We're going to keep it on an Ethereum chain, and everyone's going to be able to see this fluctuation maybe in real time and report out. Now, of course, the buyer doesn't want that to necessarily be happening, right? They don't want to know or have other people be able to validate or vet that the stoves are underperforming and the challenges that go along with that. So now where we've pivoted to, since people essentially were not interested in that level of transparency and validation for how a project could work, is using it as a risk mitigation. And understanding the user intelligence, understanding the different ways they're using the stove stacking in households and fluctuations and changes, and also if a series or section of stoves goes offline underneath current MRV process, you might not catch that till 6 months or a year when you go back with a clipboard and survey that community again. But if we have that reporting in real time, we all of a sudden realize that those stoves have gone offline and we can be there within a matter of a few days and replace that stove, do more training, do more on-the-ground engagement. So it's really interesting to hear from like the buyer side and the platforms and where there's a huge value add for the technology. And I hope that as a community, our adoption of it on that side really trickles down and continues to penetrate the MRV space, because we're not quite there yet.
Thanks, Mike. What I love about that example is you pivoted, right? So the business case wasn't there on how you first started out, so then you made a turn and put the tech in a different direction. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have a buyer for the credit, right, it doesn't help the market grow. So,
and I would just say the challenge is because we're competing against other stoves that don't have that technology, and no one's forcing them in the voluntary space to have that. And so we're competing in a competitive, we're in a competitive pricing landscape. And when you start adding more things and also you're creating less carbon savings tonnage, it starts to really put you at a disadvantage financially to other cook stove projects, because at the end of the day, you only get that stamp.
Really interesting. Let's touch on regulatory. At least here in the U.S., there's growing interest both on the carbon side and on crypto and Bitcoin, all of it, for the government to potentially intervene and put more requirements around it, TBD on when or what that looks like. But I'm curious what our three panelists think in terms of, is this good or bad for the space? Are we prepared for it? What would be the implications? Who would like to start? Maybe go back to Corinne.
Interestingly enough, I think I actually believe that in order for us to get what we want is a viable market, highly liquid, highly commoditized, easy access, easily and fungible. All of those things that we want requires there to be some sort of regulatory structure around us. I actually do believe that. We're seeing a lot of regulatory talk. We're seeing the SEC come out talking about climate reporting. We've seen TCFD. We see all of the accounting bodies for sustainability merging into one. And climate is at the central core of a lot of these discussions. And so I think in order for us in the markets to be able to defend what we do, how we do it, and why we do it, and to be able to demonstrate results, that we have to be prepared for regulation. AirCarbon is... again, as an exchange, again, using token, the biggest issue, if you talk to a regulator and you say, okay, I'm developing a carbon exchange. Oh, that's good. I'm using the blockchain. Oh, kind of get that. Yeah, okay. No, that's kind of good. We've heard it kind of helps, I'm tokenizing stuff. And they're like, oh, God. Like, all of a sudden the discussion changes because, if from the Bitcoin experience, the crypto experience, as soon as you start talking about tokens, anything to do with tokens, there is, in the regulatory, and this is not meant to be an affront to the regulators because they're not in the markets. This is not what they do. They don't develop technology. They don't run financial markets. They try to regulate them, and they try to keep up. And they're like, we don't even know where to start thinking about that. I have personally been in a regulatory process for the last number of months, and I can tell you it's actually a good process to go through because if you want to be respected and considered as a very important player in the space, you got to be able to communicate what it is that you're actually doing. AirCarbon is actually just announced last week with Abu Dhabi, with the ADGM, the Financial Services Authority there, that we are going to be the first, carbon, where they are going to be the first country to have a regulated carbon market, and we are actually going through that process with them. So we are going through the regulatory process as we speak. And it really brings a lot of credibility from my perspective. You want to be participating in the financial markets with all of the, just like other exchanges are. Some of them are self-regulated, but a lot of them are regulated. You got to be prepared to be able to go through the processes and walk the talk. And so I think it's going to lead to a lot of transparency and a lot more credibility in this market.
Good input. All right, Neil, how about you?
Regulation is critical, and we now know, the White House has issued a major statement over the next year that they're going to be addressing these issues. There's going to be blood in the streets. I'm sorry, I really do believe that you're going to see a lot of cryptocurrencies that will have a lot of problems. Many of these cryptocurrencies have funded themselves through ICOs, actually virtually all of them except for Bitcoin, which wasn't pre-selling, and through Dogecoin because it was a joke. So they didn't sell anything. But if you look at almost every other currency from Ethereum on downward, they are at risk to going through what Ripple did. They become an illegal security. That's a problem. In addition, we've been looking at proof of work, which we all know is disastrous. They're trying to move to proof of stake, which basically means those that own the coins and own the chain are the validators. They continue to earn, and it becomes centralized beyond being an oligarchy, meaning that it's not inclusive. Those parties, of course, they love it because they get to earn a lot of money. So proof of stake has now been, Gary Gensler, who's SEC, has come out and said they believe that may be a security. So we're going to have an issue with that. So I think we really need to pay a lot of attention to that. Chia, very difficult, but we decided, then they went through, they looked at all the problems. They're like, there's a problem with the consensus and energy. Let's get rid of it. The language, programming language is very insecure. Let's change it and use Lisp. And with the regulatory issues, we've decided to never sell a single coin. So the only way to get a Chia coin is to either be a validator and farm it, or to buy it secondhand on an exchange. But or actually not even on an exchange. You could buy it decentralized. It's truly DeFi. But what's interesting is that I think that's going to become really critical down the path. And there may be safe harbor that's given to some of these companies because they don't want to see so much blood in the water. But next year is going to be really interesting, and I think everybody should be prepared and keep that in mind.
Thanks, Neil. Mike, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, and I'm glad that Neil covered it a bit from the crypto side, because I think that's really important for all of us to understand. And maybe I'll think and put my comments more on the carbon side and the carbon regulatory side. And I think folks saw last Monday the SEC rule. I think that's really important to be following and understanding how we're going to be setting new regulated carbon markets. And we have to understand the precedent that's been set, and we have to look at the various state policies that are currently out there and what do they mean for our market space in place. No one in this room has ever bought an offset on the Reggie marketplace for Massachusetts. Why? Because even though we are allowed to have offsets in Reggie and in Massachusetts, it has to be a jurisdictional project in the state of Massachusetts. And at that pricing, no offset project has ever worked, right? So when we look at some of those regulations and some of those policies, which I think we also need from the carbon space, because it's going to guarantee that we have, to use our own buzzword, permanence as a part of the regulation framework going forward, we need regulations actually backing, supporting, and moving forward with carbon markets. It's also going to be driving our prices, right? And as it is in California and the other states and other countries. I'd say the last piece that just to always though keep in mind is regulation, whether it be at a state or a federal level, is never setting the high bar. It's setting the base, right? So that's always a place where if we're in the voluntary space, we need to be way out in front of that, of course, making sure that you're not in a risky position. But just know that regulation is never in reality going to be, the ceiling for what's possible. It's always the laggard.
Thanks for the perspective. Yeah, it's interesting to hear, like, our panel all sounds like they have some degree of favor in terms of regulation and that bringing some structure to the market. I thought of another topic, which there's been plenty of media coverage this past year around, blending carbon and blockchain. What if some of the blockchain applications are so heavy that they then outweigh the balance of the carbon benefits? And so I think Neil touched on it with saying if we move to proof of stake, that might improve it. But I'd love to get the panelists' take on that, because I think it's kind of a hot topic out there that people are curious about, and it's probably one of those devils in the details, right? Each one's different. But what do you three think about that balance, and how big of an issue is that in your view? Mike, why don't you start?
Well, I'm probably the least versed, maybe necessarily in this. From my perspective, though, is how maybe is it not only increasing the heaviness of the carbon for it, but also the opportunity for financial flow. Not to pivot your question, but I'll create financial flow back to the community. In my perspective, one of the things that makes a project the most valid, of course, is its carbon savings, but is also its community impact at the end of the day. From ours, where many of us are sitting in the voluntary market, when we start to think about co-benefits and community impact, it's also driving price premium. So as much as we can be using this technology to maybe cut down or do it in more efficient ways from a carbon perspective, we also need to be thinking about, at the end of the day, whether that's a nature-based solution or a cook stove project or a gas flaring project, what is the actual community benefit, and that we're not just, carbon blindness going into any project that we want to invest in and support.
So we take it really seriously, and I take it seriously. One of the reasons why it took me 3 years to identify with the blockchain that I could work with was because of all the hidden impacts. And even the blockchains where it's like, hey, we're not proof of work, we're proof of stake. Well, again, that's the oligarchy. That means that you're all getting rich. In addition, typically they would be on top of Ethereum, which was, again, proof of work, and they would kind of obfuscate what the real... Yeah, I'm going to just, if you look at Digiconomist, when they look at Polygon came out with a very low footprint, and then Digiconomist that actually goes through the blockchain functions showed it was 2,100 times higher than was claimed. And that's what we're seeing. So it's time, I think this is where the carbon market, AIDA, the authorities need to step in and make sure that they qualify these technologies. I mean, this has always been a theory, but any technology that's truly advanced must also advance the biosphere and society. And if they don't, go back to square one, because you're not advanced. Bitcoin had some things right, but it wasn't. It made a big mistake. All of these missed it, and that is what you need to do. And if I give one quick story, but when we came out, and I got so excited the more I got to see what Chia was doing, I invested, and I'm like, this is great. And then they launched Chia, and because it uses hard drives, there was this massive rush on hard drives, and global hard drive prices doubled. And everybody's like, oh my God, e-waste, it's going to be terrible. And I was super stressed, because here I was like really into this, and I'm like, oh my God, am I trading energy for e-waste? So I reached out to Bill McDonough, who, Cradle to Cradle, father of circular economy, and we talked to Microsoft, and they're like, 70+% of all hard drives go to data centers and on contract. And those data centers rip out those drives every 3 years or less, because a 2 gigabyte or a 6 gigabyte terabyte drive becomes a 12 terabyte drive in the same slot. They rip it out and they go, it's no longer data durable. According to the rules in the US you had to physically destroy that drive for data security, and it was landfilled. And they never talked about this. And I was like, wait, everybody here, I'm a university in the city, I am destroying all of these hard drives, and no one talks about it. They're like, yeah, we wish we could do something, but that's the law. So we started the Circular Drive Initiative. Now we have Western Digital, Seagate, Microsoft, all of the main cloud servers have come in. They've committed to not destroy drives. We had the law changed at Chia. We created this nonprofit led by Bill. We had the law changed on destruction. You do not have to destroy the hard drives anymore. You can electronically wipe them. And we're changing it. We realized that, gosh, if we could cause a problem, let's take that challenge and let's turn it into something beneficial. We made no money on it. We're funding this whole system, and now it's become its own initiative, which is great, because we also figured out that if you save the hard drive issue, then you're saving all of these computers that were shredded because it was too hard to remove the hard drives and do this. They were shredding the whole systems. That was a bottleneck. So the idea is, like, always look at what's driving it, and if you can, take that problem and turn it for good. Take that momentum. So I hope that's the kind of momentum we all need.
Yeah. Neil, that's such a good example of unintended consequences and then having to map that out and, redirect. So I'd like to turn to Corinne, but just to cue everybody up, after that we'll open it up to Q&A. So if you want to start thinking of questions, we'll do it old school style where you can actually just ask the question. I don't know if we want to have people kind of come to a central aisle or if we have a mic to pass around. Yeah, so we'll just kind of call on people. But let me turn to Corinne first on that one and get her thoughts on blockchain impacts versus the offset piece.
So I'm going to actually say something which I'm just it's dangerous for me to even say because I don't know enough about it to back it up. My colleague here, Zinat from AirCarbon, may have some additional information, but we have an amazing head of IT at AirCarbon, which we both say whenever he starts talking, I guess it's a good thing, it just goes right over our head, but there's a lot of other people that know exactly what he's talking about, and he's done a lot of work in the blockchain and crypto space to try to address some of these challenges. So the one thing you always hear about the energy use in crypto and all that sort of stuff, and so I actually asked him one day. I said, Dom, what's this all about? What's it mean? And so he went through all of this, through this discussion with me, and said we use Ethereum, we use Polygon. The way in which we use the Polygon on the blockchain enables us not to be energy intensive the way that some of these crypto and Bitcoin companies are, because of the way in which we use the information in a time series. So, which is kind of interesting. So now that this whole energy usage around Bitcoin has become a huge issue, there are innovative people that are in the technology space that are figuring out how to use the technology again to solve the problems of the technology. So again, if you're interested in learning more about that, I'm happy to put you in touch with our head of IT at AirCarbon. But I just want to go back to sort of around the basis, so about the blockchain itself. Like, what I find absolutely amazing, again, when the introduction I sort of said, I was hooked when I said I wanted to join AirCarbon, it was because, it's like this blockchain, it just provides truth. It provides truth of ownership. It's decentralized. You don't actually have to trust the people that any of you have ever tried to do a transaction, usually they break down because the trust breaks down in the transaction. The buyers and the sellers can't agree on terms and they end up in a bad position and nobody can actually get to the end of the deal. It's trustless. Everybody has gone through their KYC process. Everybody has access to the technology, the way that we've organized it. We are bankrupt through remote. We have a trustee structure. We have a fourth level of verification on our exchange with the British Standards Institute. So not just Vera. We go through the Vera registry. We've meet all their requirements, but then we say, okay, what if we miss something? So we hand everything over to BSI, and they do their own verification before we ever clear a transaction, for example. So, and it's all transparent, and you don't actually have to implicitly trust anything or anyone because you can see exactly at every step what is happening in the blockchain. And you also have that immutable and irrefutable record. So, there are good things about blockchain, and there are, challenges that we need to address, and some of those including some of the environmental issues that happen as a result of the use of some of this technology. But, man, I can't think of a time when I would sit down at my desk and be able to look at 3 to 4 transactions that have cleared through my office, not in my office because I'm in Canada, but in the office in a couple of hours. Like, I don't know, I see Craig out there in the back who's, hosting this conference, and it would be months sometimes to get to transactions in the early 2000s, late 2000s, and this is That's the beauty of the blockchain. Got lots of goods and bads about anything that we do in life, but if we find out how to overcome challenges and use the good aspects and make sure that we're being transparent, to me, there's no limit what we can do with technology.
Thanks, all good insights, and it'll be interesting over time to see. We have this range of suite of choices, right, and what to apply to what, and some have different trade-offs and pros and cons, and so which ones make the most sense where, but it's evolving. Let's do some Q&A. Maybe just raise hands and we'll go from there. Okay, right there.
I can't hear you.
Could you introduce yourself before your question, if that's okay? Hey, Claire.
Maybe I can start if I got everything. I'll start. I think the standardization in the token space is going to happen eventually. We have at AirCarbon we have 6 tokens. It doesn't take the place of certification and issuance. By the way, it actually enables you to efficiently put all types of different offsets that are similar in nature and meet all the same types of specifications into a bucket so that you can actually create some liquidity in that bucket and be able to transact them. Again, the token is just a digital representation of the blockchain. And I guess I would hesitate to put too much. The beauty of being able to tokenize is that you can actually transact seamlessly. And, for example, not to put words in, you're moderating the session, you're not actually talking about your organization, but, we have a couple of tokens at AirCarbon that are very similar and to some extent fungible with what CBL does. So our Global Nature token and our Global Nature Plus token, we have seen some fungibility in different elements of those tokens between our exchange and CBL, for example. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think we're going to need to get to a place where there is a lot of fungibility across them. And I'm not sure if I answered your question appropriately, but I think that it doesn't replace certification and issuance. It is good, and it does just represents the blockchain in a more efficient manner.
Thanks, Corinne. Yeah, and I didn't intro myself properly earlier. I work for Xpansiv, which is the parent company of CBL. And the main difference is we are a spot market where the credits are tied to underlying physical asset without a tokenization process, and we're on a different type of software than a blockchain. But it is interesting to parse out what are the similarities and the differences, and we're happy to chat with people afterwards more on that too. I think Neil wanted to answer that question as well.
Yeah. First of all, not every credit wants to be tokenized, and I think that would be a mistake. I think at this point, there's the conventional process which works. The registries have done this; it's worked very well. And what we can do is, I don't want to sprinkle blockchain on everything. Blockchain is a solution for very specific issues and should be used then. Any other time is a waste, and actually is problematic. So, digital monitoring and verification, as Mike was talking about, when done correctly, and I believe also constantly being calibrated by in-person, by using the classic uses, so we don't just depend on one thing and say this is perfect because we're so damn great, but we actually constantly question what we're doing and make sure that it's right. I also think that what would be good is to see some standardization around how tokenization works, but also looking at native tokenization. I think the registries have done an amazing job. They have been the source of this environmental integrity and credibility. They should be in charge of how this tokenization happens. So if they want, if an account holder wants to tokenize their credit, create a digital version of that credit. It's not a representation. It is the actual credit in that registry in a digital format. It's pretty simplistic. And yes, there can be a shared public benefit tool that will do that. I think that's going to be created. As I mentioned, we're helping build this infrastructure for free. We've built out the climate warehouse for the World Bank. We're building out this incredible system with the country of Costa Rica to be a showpiece as a national registry, from metrics all the way to transacting and working on the global scale, and that's open source. That'll be shared with every country. So creating systems that are interoperable, but yet create the autonomy that's needed, that's what's important. Getting the standards right and making sure that nobody is smoking their own crack. I'm sorry. We need to constantly look at what we're doing and question ourselves. And that's the main issue.
So let me just make, if you don't mind, one point of clarification. Sorry, Neil, and I hate to do this, but we are not actually trying to create something new. The token is actually a digital representation which meets all of the requirements of the credits that are on the registry. Because if you got to remember that we are actually transacting carbon credits we only transact carbon credits that have been certified and issued by Verra, by Gold Standard, by CAR, and to some point in the future by ACR and by reputable registries. So we're not actually trying to create something different. We agree with that, and that's the way that we've developed our company.
If I can just clarify,
yeah, we'll have this back and forth. We want to try
to
get a few more audience
quickly.
questions, but this is an important
topic.
topic.
What I was saying is that the first step, tokenization natively, it's exactly the same thing. It doesn't solve all the fungibility. It doesn't create the liquidity we want, because it's still, each one is going to be, this is from this specific project in this vintage, etc. Therefore, yes, pooling and creating systematic approaches to doing that's fine, but then those tokens are actually, it's kind of like it's like the old dollar, which was a gold certificate, right? You could redeem it back for that actual token, but the base is a native token, and that needs to be controlled, because when we take it out of control of the authorities that have actually managed this integrity, that's where we start to get sunk. That's where we lose what this market needs to be credible.
Thanks, Neil. All right, other questions? Right here in the front row.
Yeah, I was offering some cryptocurrency for carbon credits, which my carbon credits are not approved on Verra yet, but they're approved on a registry for compliance. My question is, if I do that, how will I ever know that cryptocurrency is going to stay or die?
And let me repeat that in the mic for folks who might not be able to hear it. How will he know?
I think I got an email from Nigeria
carbon?
too offering me those, so I wouldn't. I would.
Great question about authentication. How will he know and have an assurance down the road that it's legitimate if it's a crypto carbon combination?
You won't know. You need to, if you're going to transact your carbon credits, at least at this point in the market, from my perspective, I think there's going to be a lot more scrutiny there are some NFTs, some crypto plays that are actually good ones. They just have to they have to be able to distinguish themselves from some of the other ones. But at this point in time, my advice to you would be to transact your credits through, take your credits onto a registry and transact them that way, through an exchange, through a broker, through a developer, through whoever. But if you want them to retain their value over the long term and be traceable and verifiable, I think you need to go in what's the carbon mainstream right now. My advice. But
Let's chat after to follow up on that one, so we can hear from some others. But
I just want to point out a risk that we all went through. So those that have been in the market a long time know what happened in 2012 or so, when these boiler rooms were picking up all of these carbon credits in the registries at that point, and they were selling them to pensioners and claiming this is the best investment ever. And people lost all of their money. And they were then calling up the registry saying, hey, where's my carbon credits that were so valuable that we're doing this? It's happening again, and it's happening with blockchain. Blockchain has become, blockchain and carbon has become the new sexy investment. This is not a tool, and cryptocurrency doesn't make carbon any sexier. It just makes it a little easier to transact. It makes it a little bit, it makes the ability for those that should be in the market have the ability to transact more efficiently and to scale these markets as we need to. But I would never advise this as an investment for any individual. It really is a mistake. And you look like a nice man. I would really hope that there are ways to get involved and do great things for this world, but there are so many scams that this is something that is not best done in any other way, because there's very little credibility in these markets. I'm sorry.
Neil, I really appreciate your candor. I mean, you're telling it like it is from your lived experience. It's pretty cool. Does anyone have a question for Mike? We probably have time for, I think, one more, and he didn't weigh in on the last one or two. Anyone got for a funder and someone who's been in the field a while, or another question you had in mind?
I was going to say, if it's too intimidating, I can also speak afterwards, but please go ahead.
I'm very curious how blockchain is going to interact with the Internet of Things, and what, because you were talking about different projects, the verification of the solar cook is very hard to do. So do you think there's specific projects that are going to be able to be verified the most easily with sensors on IoT through the blockchain?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it really depends on if we can break all of the middlemen out in that household that is either using their cell phone or has a person in their community that's using their cell phone to upload the usage data through a USB up onto a chain. If that actually has cut all of the middlemen out, and then there's a buyer on the other side of that who is immediately able to take it off, and then we have a direct infusion of a currency that's probably more stable than the fiat currency in some of these locations. If we can actually break through there and create that direct supply to buyer, then there's a massive opportunity, certainly, with that. But we're still a ways off, right? Because you still have to do as Neil was saying, we still have to go out there on the motorbikes with the pads of paper and do the actual surveys and talking with the communities before we can actually upload a project and claim the carbon savings. But it's not until we get past that point where we'll actually really be able to fully utilize the opportunity there. But I dream of it.
Thanks, Mike. Well, we're at time, but thank you all for bearing with us on the opening and closing doors. Let's round of applause for the panelists.